It's night. A fire burns. Grain piled high in clay jars. Mice moving in the dark. Warm orange light on faces. A cup passed hand to hand. Someone singing. Someone dancing. Two small eyes at the edge of the light. Yellow. Unblinking. Watching. That animal has no business being this close. It is a wild predator, and in front of it sits a crowd of large, loud primates it should be treating as a threat, but it isn't leaving. And in that small, strange decision to sit at the edge of a human fire instead of running from it, the longest and most one sided partnership in the history of animals quietly began. This is roughly 10,000 years ago, somewhere in the Fertile Crescent. The creature in the dark is a Near Eastern wildcat, the specific Fertile Crescent population that genetics traces every house cat alive back to. And it looks almost exactly like the tabby that might be asleep on your couch right now. Same size, same stripes, same face. The only real difference is the expression, which is considerably less friendly, and the complete absence of any interest in you personally. So here is the question. Cats and humans had shared the same landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years before this night, and nothing happened. No bond, no partnership, nothing. And then, in a relatively short window, everything changed. Why did wild cats become part of human life exactly when they did, and not at any point in the vast stretch of time before it? The answer isn't one thing. It's several conditions that had to line up at once, and every one of them is still shaping the animal in your home tonight. Let's go through them. Start with why it was impossible for almost all of human history. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were mobile, hunter gatherers, moving with the seasons, following food across the landscape, and rarely staying anywhere for long. And a group like that has almost nothing to offer a wild cat. They don't grow grain, they don't stockpile calories in one fixed place. They don't build the one thing a small predator actually cares about, a large, stationary concentration of food that pulls in rodents and holds them there. So, for all those millennia, cats and humans simply passed each other. They shared rivers and forests and plains. They saw each other constantly, and the relationship went precisely nowhere because neither one had a reason to change it. Then humans discovered something that rewrote everything. They learned that if you put seeds in the ground and stayed near them, food grew. And if you stored that food, you could survive the seasons when nothing grew at all. And if you did that reliably, you no longer had to move. Agriculture didn't just change the human diet, it changed the human address. For the first time, people stopped following food and started living on top of it. And that created a problem nobody saw coming: grain stores. Large, sealed, calorie dense piles of food sitting in one place season after season. To a human, that is survival. To a mouse, that is paradise. Rodents are extraordinarily good at two things: finding food and making more rodents. And a settlement with a few years of stored grain was, from a mouse's point of view, close to heaven. The grain vanished into small teeth. It got fouled. Food that took an entire season of backbreaking work to grow was being destroyed faster than anyone could protect it. This wasn't a nuisance. It was an existential threat. If you cannot keep food between harvests, the entire agricultural experiment falls apart. The grain had to be defended. And humans, for all their tools and fire and cleverness, were genuinely bad at catching mice. The cat was not. A wildcat is a rodent killing instrument refined over millions of years. Retractable claws, eyes tuned to lock onto fast, small movement, explosive acceleration over short distances, the patience to sit frozen for as long as it takes, and a prey drive so deep that killing mice isn't a chore for it, it's a compulsion. Its hearing is tuned to the high pitched rustle of a mouse in the dark, a frequency range built almost entirely around finding exactly this kind of prey. A wildcat that wandered into a grain store full of rodents wasn't doing anyone a favor. It was doing the single thing its entire body was built to do, in the single best place in the world to do it, and doing it with something close to joy. The humans noticed. Of course they noticed. The mice near the grain were disappearing, and the thing making them disappear wanted nothing from anyone except more mice. And so people made a very simple, very practical decision: don't chase it off. That decision to tolerate the cat rather than drive it away is the actual beginning of everything. And notice it runs in both directions, because the cat was making a calculation of its own. From the Wildcats side, sitting at the edge of a loud human settlement made sense for three separate reasons. First, the food. Nowhere else in the entire landscape offered this much prey in this small a space. A grain store was a permanent, self restocking mouse buffet. No wild hunting ground could compete with it. Second, safety. This is the part people miss. A human settlement at night, full of fire, noise, movement, and bodies, was terrifying to the larger predators that would happily eat a small cat. By sitting near the humans, the cat borrowed their protection. The same racket that should have scared it off was quietly keeping the things that hunted it at a distance. Third, and most important, this particular cat simply wasn't that bothered. Most wildcats would bolt at the first burst of human noise, but temperament varies from animal to animal, and a few individuals were just naturally calmer, less reactive, less afraid. Those were the ones who could tolerate the fire and the singing and the chaos long enough to reach the mice. And that small difference in nerves is where the whole story turns. What's happening here has a name: commensalism. Two species living side by side, where one clearly benefits and the other isn't really harmed or helped beyond simply putting up with it. The cats got the mice, the humans kept their grain. Nobody was breeding anybody. Nobody was selecting for traits. These cats were still completely wild. They were just wild in closer and closer proximity to people who had stopped throwing rocks at them, and the humans made that edge of the settlement more inviting than they ever realized. Because ancient human nights were not quiet. Anthropologists who study modern hunter gatherer communities have found that daytime talk is mostly practical, about work, about resources, about who did what. But at night, around the fire, the conversation shifts almost entirely to something else: stories, singing, dancing. The overwhelming majority of firelit talk by these accounts was social rather than practical. In plain terms, ancient humans gathered after dark and, in their own way, threw a party. And in early farming settlements, with fermented grain drinks in the mix, those gatherings got warmer, louder, and more enthusiastic. And this isn't just a nice guess. At Göbekli Tepe, in what is now Turkey, people gathered again and again across the 10th to 8th millennia before the Common Era to feast, to haul enormous stone pillars into place, and, by the look of the evidence, to drink. Traces of what may be some of the earliest brewing have been found in the region in stone vessels that predate settled farming itself. Whatever else these gatherings were, they were loud, they were regular, and they were the social center of the whole community. The fire was where life happened after dark. For a cat, that firelit edge was close to perfect. The light drew insects. The insects drew small animals. The grain drew mice. The noise kept the bigger predators away. Night after night, a warm, safe, prey-rich zone switched on at the boundary of the human world, and the cats slid quietly into it. They weren't becoming tame. They weren't developing affection. They were exploiting an opportunity that no other animal was positioned to take. Now, here's the part that surprises almost everyone. We didn't domesticate cats. Not really. Not the way we bred livestock: cattle, sheep, horses. Every one of them was shaped by humans deliberately choosing which animals bred, generation after generation, selecting for the traits we wanted. Cats skipped all of that. Nobody selected them. They selected themselves. Dogs, it's worth saying, likely began the same way, as wolves that scavenged the edges of human camps long before anyone bred them on purpose. But cats took that path further and stayed on it. With dogs, deliberate breeding eventually took over. With cats, it barely ever did. The calmer cats stayed near the settlement and ate well and had kittens there. The nervous ones fled and stayed wild. And over many generations, the population living alongside humans quietly shifted toward the tamer end. Not because anyone planned it, but because tameness was simply what survived in that environment. The grain and the mice and the firelight did the selecting. The people just happened to be standing there while it happened. And it goes further than that. Cats, even now, are barely domesticated at all. A house cat and its wild ancestor are almost impossible to tell apart. The skeletons are nearly identical, and the core behavior, the hunting, the marking, the fierce independence, is essentially unchanged. Researchers have noted that domestication seems to have left cats remarkably untouched compared to what it did to dogs, which is why the difference runs so deep. A dog returned to the wild often struggles to survive because we reshaped it into something that needs us. A cat returned to the wild just goes back to being a cat. It hunts, it marks its territory, It manages perfectly well. There is one thing the cat did change, though, and it aimed it squarely at us. Adult wildcats almost never meow at each other. It's not really part of how they communicate in the wild, but domestic cats meow constantly, and they do it at people, apparently having worked out that we respond to it. That sound your cat makes to be fed, to be let out, to be acknowledged, is not an ancient animal instinct. It is a tool developed over thousands of years for managing humans. The cat learned our weakness and built a signal to exploit it. The cat never needed us. It stayed because the deal was good. And it's worth being honest about what that deal actually was, because it was not sentimental. These early settlements were hard places to live. Disease moved easily through them. Food was never guaranteed. Life was frequently short and often brutal, and nobody in those first villages was keeping cats for comfort. The cat was tolerated because it was useful, and it stayed because we were useful to it. Whatever affection eventually grew between the two species came later, and it came slowly. So, what turned a useful animal into a genuine companion? Almost certainly, children. Every settlement had them, and children have always behaved toward animals in the same way, with open, fearless, completely non threatening curiosity. To a wary wildcat, a small, slow, high voiced child isn't a predator. It's just a strange, harmless little creature. And kittens born inside the settlement, raised from birth around human voices and human smells and human movement, never learn to fear any of it. A kitten that grows up with people simply reads them as part of the normal world, in a way a kitten born in the wild never could. A child who found one of those kittens did exactly what children do: picked it up, fed it scraps, carried it around. And in that contact, a young human and a young cat, relaxed and unafraid of each other, the relationship crossed a line. It stopped being tolerance, it started becoming a bond. And we have physical proof of how far that bond had come. On the island of Cyprus, at a site called Shilurocombos, archaeologists uncovered a burial dating to around 9,500 years ago. A person laid carefully to rest, and beside them, deliberately placed a cat. That detail matters more than it first appears. Cyprus had no native wildcats of its own, which means this cat did not wander there on its own. Someone put it on a boat and carried it across open water to a new home. Someone valued a specific cat enough to bring it along on that journey, and enough that when they died, the animal was laid to rest at their side. That is not a mouse catcher tolerated near the grain. That is a companion. Roughly 9,500 years ago, on a Mediterranean island, it seems someone loved their cat, and almost nothing about that has changed since. And that is the strange beauty of the whole story. There was no plan, no breeding program, no grand human decision to fold cats into our world. There was only a chain of accidents that happened to line up. Humans needed to store grain. Stored grain drew mice. Mice drew cats. Cats were tolerated because they solved a problem. The warm, noisy, prey rich edge of the settlement kept them close. The calm ones bred. Children befriended their kittens. And a wild predator became, without anyone ever deciding it, part of the human household. Every other domestic animal was pulled into our world. The cat let itself in. So there was never a single reason wild cats became our companions. There were many, converging quietly in the dark. A settled human world that finally had something to offer. Grain that summoned the mice, a predator perfectly built to hunt them, a fire that held back the bigger dangers, a handful of unusually calm animals, and children who couldn't resist a kitten. None of it was designed. All of it still lives in the animal watching you from across the room right now, because somewhere tonight at the edge of the light, there is almost certainly a cat doing exactly as it pleases, completely certain that this is how things are supposed to be. It didn't come to us because we called it. It came because we had grain and mice and a warm fire and a party going on in the dark. And it decided, entirely on its own terms, to stay.